Amid reform movement, some GOP states police is getting more power. And so I'm going to actually go to the title because I believe there's more to this title than what I was reading. Um, so basically, you see the protesters here, and they have signs saying defund the police. And so a lot of that was going on in 2020. A lot of that was going on in a lot of the protests that were happening. So the title is Amid Reform Movement, Some GOP States Give Police More Power. So Columbus, Ohio, this is out of Associated Press. And so after a year of protest over police brutality, some Republican controlled states have ignored or they've even blocked police reform proposals, moving instead in another direction by granting greater powers to police officers, making it harder to discipline them and expanding their authority to crack down on demonstrations. So that's protests. If there's ever any other incidences that happen involving shootings, um, misconduct of officers. So instead of them falling in line with trying to reform and trying to make change, they're trying to push back on that. So the sponsors of the GOP measure acted in the wake of the nationwide protest that followed George Floyd's death, and they cited the disturbances and destruction that spread last summer through major U.S. cities, including Portland, New York, and Minneapolis, where Floyd died at the hands of officers. So we have to strengthen our laws when it comes to mob violence. So to make sure individuals are unequivocally dissuaded from committing violence when they're in a large group. So Florida State Representative Juan Fernandez Barquin, and he's a Republican, he said during a hearing for an anti-riot bill. So this is what they put together. It's called anti-riot. That was enacted in April. So Florida is one of the few states this year to both expand their police authority and pass reforms. So they're passing more reforms in favor of law enforcement than rather against the actions of law enforcement. And so a separate bill awaiting action by the governor would require additional use of force. So that means they would be even more aggressive than they have been. And use of force training and ensure officers intervene in another uses of excessive force. And so states where lawmakers push back against the police reform movement include, these are the following states: Arizona, Iowa, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Wyoming, according to an Associated Press review of legislation. So Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signed a bill Thursday to expand qualified immunity for police officers and enhance penalties for protesters. So there's penalties for you to protest. So they are starting to crack down and make it so that it's harder to even protest. And so those freedoms that people had before in protest might change altogether because of the demonstrations that we had since the George Floyd and even before prior incident. So including elevating rioting as a felony. And so they're even trying to up the ante in some of the states of penalizing people for rioting or participating in riots. And so this is about protecting law enforcement. And think about it. They're more concerned about law enforcement than they are the community and the people and their feelings. And so that's what it's sounding like here. They're more in favor of law enforcement. So these are definitely police states. And so it could spread. And giving them the tools that they need to keep our communities safe, as they claim, and showing them that we have their back. And so they're more about the police rather than these people, saying that they're having all these issues with law enforcement and misconduct of law enforcement. So this was said by Representative Gerard Klein, I believe his name, a supporter of the bill. So there's a lot of supporters, and these are Republican and they're red states. And so the bill was passed by GOP controlled, and notice they used the word controlled legislature despite promises last summer by the Republican governor of GOP legislation or legislative leaders to try to end discriminatory police behavior and adopt other criminal justice reforms. So they basically went back and backpedaled all the way back and went totally in favor in another direction of law enforcement. So Reynolds introduced measures at the start of 2021 legislative session to ban racial profiling by police and established a system for tracking racial data on police stops. Both ideas were recommended by the task force the governor appointed in November of 2019. Instead, Republican lawmakers left out those proposals. They ditched those and pushed through this new bill. So Reynolds acknowledged that she doesn't always get what she wants, even from her own party, and so she plans to reintroduce the measure next year, a spokesperson said. So reform advocates found the quick reversal by Iowa Republicans disappointing. And so there are people in the background trying to change some of this, but there's more people that are trying to go against what the community is feeling and how they've experienced some of these long time incidences and historical incidences of systemic racial profiling and discrimination. So, would it have been too hard to do the right thing? Democratic State Representative Ross Smith asked during a floor debate over this bill. And so you decided to make this an either or, to trample on the freedom to show support for law enforcement in ways that they didn't even ask for. So after Floyd's death, Oklahoma Democrats tried to seize on the protest movement to pass bills that would ban the use of chokeholds, provide uniform guidance for body cameras, and create a database of police use of force incidents. But none of those proposals even received a hearing. So one GOP lawmaker called them unnecessary after the measure faced opposition and, from the rank and file officers, prosecutors, and county sheriffs. So instead, the Republican dominated State House passed legislation to grant immunity to drivers whose vehicles strike and injure protesters on public streets. So you hear that? They grant immunity, and to prevent the doxing or releasing of personal identification information of law enforcement officers if the intent is to stalk, harass, or threaten the officer. And so I was a little disappointed because these were simply accountability measures aimed at making sure that the public understands what happens when something goes wrong, said Representative Monroe Nicholas, a Democrat whose father and uncle were police officers themselves. So in Wyoming, Democratic State Representative Carly Provenza introduced a bill that would have prevented officers who are dismissed for misconduct from being hired by another law enforcement agency. So her bill passed the House, but it failed in the Senate, which are both controlled by Republicans, of course. So if the conversation is this is an anti-policing bill rather than this is an accountability bill, it has a steeper hill to climb, Provenza said. So that's what this fight is. So they've been fighting in the White House over these type of bills and what should pass and what shouldn't pass. And when you have a group that is controlling the narratives of how things are basically looked at or viewed, like they say, is it Rather, is this an anti-policing bill or is it more about accountability? And so they're looking at it from an anti-policing bill stance, and that's the reason why they're in favor of law enforcement, rather than looking at it should be more accountability bills. So it puts the law enforcement in another state where of mind where they realize they should be held accountable for their actions as well. And so it goes on to say that while cities across the U.S. were creating or expanding civilian police oversight boards, Republican governors in Tennessee and Arizona signed into law measures that could reduce the independence of those boards. And so the GOP laws require board members to complete hours of police training or mandate that a majority of the board positions be filled with sworn officers. So critics say such steps defeat the purpose of civilian oversight. So the review boards were intended to address concerns, especially in Black communities as well, that police departments have little oversight outside their own internal review systems, which often clear officers of wrongdoings and fatal shootings, what we've been seeing more recently. And so it has all the trappings of making it look like the fox is watching the hen house. Here, Arizona State Senator Christine Engel, a Democrat, said of the state's measures. So some states continue to introduce bills to protect police, including recent proposals in Ohio and Kentucky that would make taunting or filming a police officer a crime. So listen to this, you guys. These bills are actually being put into action as people are looking at, maybe issues surrounding Juneteenth, and they're focused on reopenings. They've quickly moved on these bills to try to give more police officers power. Instead of them looking at the George Floyd incident and some of these other recent incidents as uh, teachable moments to say, hey, we need to reform law enforcement, we need to come with more accountability of officers' misconduct. No, it is all the way back. It's more than 5 steps back. It's like 10 steps backwards. And so it's really it's going to be really, really tough in the coming months when you see more shootings and more disruption, more things that could happen involving law enforcement shooting people of color. And so it says that even if you're somebody that's out trying to film it now, they're trying to make it a crime for you to film when law enforcement is doing something that is probably more than likely against what their protocols asked for them to do. And so they look at it as in Ohio and Kentucky that would make taunting or filming a police officer a crime. So you could be, instead of them holding police officers accountable, people holding their cell phones up at police officers could be taken to jail as well. But at half of the states have embraced at least some reform measures. Now, this is only half. So since May 2020, at least 67 police reforms have been signed into law in 25 states, according to the National Conference of State Legislature. And so these are those laws address neck restraints and chokeholds, body cameras, disciplinary actions, and personal records, and independent investigations among those other reforms. And so at least 13 states enacted restrictions on the use of force. At least 8 have implemented laws beefing up officer reviews and investigations, according to NCSL data. And so Minnesota banned chokeholds. Colorado became the first state in the country to strip police of qualified immunity. So some states have tried to do reforms or they've made approaches to try to hold police accountable in their way best fit. But we still have other states that are more police states. And so Washington enacted a dozen police reform laws, including restricting the use of no knock warrants and designated an independent investigator for fatal police shootings. Even GOP dominated Texas, where Floyd's body was laid to rest, implemented more uniform disciplinary actions for officer misconduct. So some of them will be looking at that and using that as the case to say we have done our part in trying to do or implement in some states some accountability. But as as goes, these controlled states are Republican controlled measures. They're trying to make it more um, in favor of law enforcement, of course. So some Democrats and Republican controlled states have become discouraged in their quest to change the justice system. So it's it's who's in there, guys. It's who's controlling things. So we just hit so many roadblocks, said South Dakota Representative Linda Duba, a Democrat who was part of a coalition to pass the reforms. And so, in the reckoning over Floyd's death, there seemed to be momentum to re-evaluate the role of policing in minority communities, Duba said, but the issue steadily calcified along political lines. And so it's happening slowly because we live in a state where people are either not exposed to it or don't believe it happens, or they believe it's unpatriotic to criticize law enforcement, she said. And so this was Associated Press writers Acacia Coronado in Austin, Texas, Brendan Farrington in Tallahassee, Florida, Stephen Groves in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Jonathan Matisse in Nashville, Tennessee, and Sean Murphy in Oklahoma City, David Pitt in Des Moines, Iowa, and Colleen Slevin in Denver contributed all to this report. And so this is what's happening. And so I think what happens is when people start focusing their attention on other things, and we had a tough year in 2020 and then 2021, and it started in 2019 around, I say, there, um, where it started to change with the pandemic uh, approaching, and so we had a lot of protests, and I believe this is not going to deter people from protesting. It's not going to stop people from speaking out. There's going to be other ways that people are going to protest, or they're going to make themselves known in even if it's in ways where it's peaceful and they get permits, which is probably what people are going to really focus on having to do, is get permits to actually. I'm seeing that happening in the near future, if not now, that people are going to have like permits to even hold protest, or um, to hold large group settings where people are able, or community members are able, to voice their opinions about law enforcement, the community issues, the social issues that are at stake. Um, so that's pretty much how this goes. And so it's important for people to realize that these laws, it seems like when they start doing all of this, making bills, it's when people's attention is focused on something else and they know you're not really looking at it as much because you're interested in reopening things, maybe going back to work or going to school, and you get busy doing something else, and then just for a second, is as long as you take your attention off those things that have really put us in a frame of mind where we need to do something, make change, there's people that are ready to just turn all of that around, you know, quickly. And they try to do it as fast as possible so that by the time something else happens, it's harder for you to come speak out on those issues because they have all these laws, all these bills to try to block you from basically holding officers accountable for the practices of brutality that we've been seeing. We've, the shootings haven't stopped. There have been more shootings more recently, and so I'm going to say this now. I know this is not related to this particular article, but it could somewhat be. So we here in California, I always like to end the articles letting you know what's going on. So in California, we've been opening really, really fast. And I've been looking at some articles where, and not only looking at articles, but I know what's going to happen. So I just have a sensing that we're not going to really go on lockdowns. There is another um, contagious virus called the Delta virus strain. And it only took, like, I believe they said 4 weeks for it to hit the UK really bad. And this, I think, is going to be even worse than people think. The lockdowns were bad, and it was tiring, it was miserable to some, and it was like, wow, what can you do? And it was really hurting the economy. And so we're rebounding and we're opening really fast in California. So a couple of things. Some of the businesses are gone and they won't come back because of the closures and the lockdowns. I do believe that the reason why we're opening is not just because of the vaccine and more people are vaccinated, but there's still a lot of people that aren't vaccinated. And what I've been hearing is that those people who aren't vaccinated are more vulnerable for this Delta virus, which is more contagious, more deadly, and it's moving quickly, and it's actually doubling or tripling each week. And so it's already here in the U.S., and so it's now being known that it is spreading. And so I believe what they're going to do, how they're going to do this, is since we're rebounding and people are able to get on their feet, semi on their feet, um, they're not looking so much at closures. They're going to probably still have protocols and mask mandates, and they'll probably look at it as more your responsibility, where you go, what crowds you're around, who you're with, what places who you're exposed to, how you handle your own self, your own situation. They're going to leave it in the laps of Americans to make those choices of safety. And they're more concerned about the economy because the economy took a huge hit. And so some people are going to, I said some, but I believe there's going to be more deaths. There's going to be more people that are going to get sick. There's more people that are susceptible to this virus. So who didn't die from the last waves that came and took people, then this might be it for those people. And so that's what makes this one a little more scarier. I believe violence will go up. There will be more protests. And so what else is happened is the moratorium. That's about to end, and it could be extended for the mere fact, not because of just the pandemic that it's still going on and it could get possibly worse, but because of the fact that from before, a lot of people have not gone back to work still. They're just getting on their feet, or they're so behind in rent or their mortgage notes that they are having trouble catching up on their payments. And so that takes time. And so there was supposed to be rent relief, mortgage relief help, and that has been really slow because of the processes they have to go through to get through to everybody. And it's very, very, very slow process. And they're trying to figure out how to speed it up and make it a little bit faster so that people won't fear losing their homes to foreclosure, and also maybe losing apartments or being put put out somewhere or displaced. And so that has been happening, unfortunately, in some states where some landlords have gotten around some of these moratorium rules. CDC rules and still have evicted people. And so you'd have to be a tenant that either you maybe got laid off and you were able to go quickly back to work and try to rebound and play catch up. You'd have to be someone who maybe had some money or left over, and you were able to kind of get your bills paid down to a point to where the landlord feels, oh yeah, this person can, or the mortgage company feels this person can, this person is savable. you know if you're like 20, 30,000, $40,000 behind, um, that's hard to try to catch that up. Even if you're like 15,000 behind, if you have been like really, really lacking in the funds of trying to cover the expenses of your housing um, situation, and you're just reliant only on the rent relief or the mortgage relief, um, and the moratorium, which is set to possibly end unless they extend it. It's no wondering when or how long it's going to take before those things actually happen. And a lot of people have been on edge and losing faith in those because of how slow they're moving. And so that's why I'm mentioning this right here, this police reform and these bills that they've been putting forth. They're getting ready because they know that if they do end this moratorium, there's going to be protests like no other. And you're going to have people who don't care about going to jail because they've already lost their home, they've lost their apartments, or they've lost their place to live, their livelihood, maybe lost their job. It could be a number of things. And so, what I have on the lighter side or brighter side, if you would want to call it, I don't know if you've been seeing this, but they've said the IRS is still sending money, checks to people. There's more into that. You can read about that. And then I've also heard that unemployment is trying to extend benefits for people who have been hit hard from the pandemic. And so they're trying to help people, those who still need the help. And they're also sending notices around to people who may need the help, and that may help with some of the bills. So a lot of people, what I've heard they've been doing is trying to keep their car, trying to keep their bills paid. In terms of maybe utilities, they've been trying to keep, some of the food on the table, things like that. But when it comes to maybe mortgage, they might be, paying on it, but not paying fully because they weren't allowed to fully go back to work. Now that things have ramped up where some people are rebounding, some people are starting to see the changes of the openings. That is the reason why Biden administration is saying that they may not be closing things down at any point soon. It would have to be something extremely devastating to the point to where there was so much death that they would feel like they were forced to close down because of the circumstance being so grave. But I don't see that happening even with that, because people are more concerned about money. They're more concerned about their business rather than people's lives. As you can see with this police reform movement, defund the police, I believe that those two things they were saying in this article, is it about anti-police or is it about holding police accountable? And so those two things were really important in the scheme of all of this. And the George Floyd incident, all these things that took place, looking at the court trials, it was a lot. And so you have to look at what's going on and how people are approaching these issues. And these states that have been controlled by, you know, the powers that be, they are moving quickly. They're not making any delays in trying to enact these bills, and they know what's coming. If the moratorium ends, there's going to probably be more crime, which is already spiking. You're going to see more fires in the downtown of Los Angeles. here in California. There have been fires, not because people have been setting them on purpose. It's because there's more homeless people that are living in RVs, living out of their car, and when they're cooking, they might be parked close to businesses, and so businesses are suffering um, the impact of that. And you have some business owners that are honestly, they're not even blaming the homeless people because they know what's going on. And so they're looking at the governor. Speaking of Governor Newsom, all these openings that are happening in record speed, that recall they were trying to do on him is now you don't really hear about it as much anymore. It's pretty much fizzling out because people are allowed to go back to their place of business. They're allowed to open up businesses, open up new businesses if they would like. There's money being generated towards those things. Also, more vaccine. Um, and so they're trying to even give gifts to people who get vaccinated, money, um, trying to scramble at the last moment to try to bring their states to at least 70% of the people being vaccinated, which I believe that'll be hard because you have a lot of people who have their own mind. They're going to use whatever it is, their beliefs, their views, or religion, or maybe fear of what being vaccinated, because some people have died for various reasons. There's been issues where, children, they said they want them vaccinated before they go back to school in the fall. That's the other thing. Teachers vaccinated because you had some teachers that died from not having any defense from this COVID. So now they have this new virus called the Delta virus. They say it was in India, and India was hit really hard, and the UK was struggling, and they're in lockdown, and it's believed that they'll stay in lockdown a little longer. I'm not sure if I heard till maybe December because of this Delta virus. It's supposed to be more contagious, more deadlier, and the CDC is sounding the alarm, and the Biden administration is sounding an alarm. But I think it's going to be worse because more people are going to be out, and they're going to be crowded in bars. And I know someone who's saying that they were putting in the media about Disneyland that they were trying to limit the numbers of people who attend the park. But I had a friend that was telling me, she said that her family had went and said they didn't want to go back because it was overly crowded. It was the opposite of what the media was saying. It wasn't a limited number of people. It was so crowded and so packed out that they couldn't even, enjoy themselves at the park at all, and they didn't feel safe. And so that's why you gotta really read between the lines of what some of these people are saying. They're saying what you want to hear in the media in terms of, oh, we're keeping the numbers low, we're keeping people safe, but the opposite is happening. And so it sounds like this virus is going to be able to just really spread like wildfire because from what they're saying, they're going to leave it in the laps. What I'm hearing is they're going to leave it in at your discretion on how you protect yourself. That's what's going to come. And so if you go unmasked, if you go to crowded bars, if you go to crowd places that are crowded down, you could get sick, and it's no longer the fault of the government or them not, making, protections for Americans. It's more on your shoulders as an individual to know that this virus, we let you know that the virus is out there, and now we leave it in your hands of how you're going to care for yourself and protect yourself accordingly. We've told you all of the steps that you need to make, people getting on airplanes. That's a contained area with just a number of people that are riding close in proximity together. When you're on public transportation, if there's not a good ventilation system, you don't know who's sick on those modes of transportation, various transportation. So it's gonna get scarier I believe, because we're going to see what the effects of this one is, this virus, and how it goes through people. Um, and it could very well be that the hospital system may collapse again, um, or may nearing collapse. And usually, when that happens, that's when the government starts to step in, and sound the alarm even louder about the safety of Americans if it really gets bad. Because if there's no way to get to the doctor and we have to go back through that again, then it's going to be pretty much a catastrophe. So, having said this, I'm going to let this go. But this is important. When people were saying defund the police, you see this here, you're going to see where other shootings are going to happen, other violence is going to happen, and those same people that you want held accountable are not going to be held accountable in the same way that Derek Chauvin was held accountable. They're trying to protect officers rather than protect the protesters. They are getting all of their ducks in a row, as you would say, and they're trying to shield themselves for the next fallout, because this virus, no telling how this can play out. And just, keep your eyes, your ears open, and if you are back to work, good, like, try to save your money, try to do what you can to protect your family, because I don't think this is going to get any better, really, to be honest with you. um, it looks like some other craziness could happen. And this right here will be something that will be so revealing to even the ones that were saying this is not real, this is not real. They're going to see the realness in all of this in this one right here. If they didn't see it before, I believe this time this will be truth telling. Thanks for listening.